I'm not going to waste your time. If Hitler had won, you'd probably be watching this video in an unrecognizable world where freedom as we know it wouldn't even exist anymore. So together, we're going to see how the world would have changed if Hitler had won the World War and what that would have changed for us. Today, we're going to talk about a topic that many of you have been asking for. Let's face it, Adolf intrigues you, doesn't he? The first novel imagining a Nazi victory was written by a certain Philip K. Dick and came out over 60 years ago. The book was adapted into a series by Amazon a few years ago. It was called The Man in the High Castle. The series was a great success and ended in 2019 after 4 seasons. And the question of what the world would have become if Hitler had won is a question that has lasted for decades, since even video games like Wolfenstein, for example, have explored it. Yes, you'll understand we're not going to focus on how the Nazis could have won the war. We don't care they won the war. We're starting from that premise. We're going to imagine what our world could have looked like if Hitler hadn't committed suicide in his bunker in 1945, facing the imminent defeat of his army. Since many authors have already looked into the subject, we'll base ourselves on some of their speculations while mixing in some others to explore one scenario among thousands possible. Are you ready? Let's go. We are in 1947 in the alternate reality. The Germans won the Battle of Stalingrad and managed to repel the famous Allied landing. Unable to continue fighting, the United States finally signed an armistice with Germany. The German 5-2 missile, equipped with the atomic weapon created by the Germans and which flew over New York, finally discouraged them. Following this peace treaty, the Americans withdrew from the conflict. Since Japan in this reality didn't receive nuclear warheads, the Americans had to bow down and hand over some islands they had, notably Hawaii. In England, they just changed kings. George VI, the father of the one we called Elizabeth II, and who in our world was Queen of England until 2022, was deposed here by Hitler. His brother Edward, who had abdicated in 1936 officially because he was dating an actress and unofficially because he was a Nazi sympathizer, was put back on the throne by Hitler himself. Churchill's government went into exile in India, a territory still British at that time, far enough from Europe to continue organizing the fight. There he continues alongside Charles de Gaulle to organize the resistance against the Nazis. In France, not much changes. France continues to be occupied and dominated by the Germans. Pierre Laval, the number 2 of the Vichy government, patiently awaits the death of old Marshal Pétain to become the new president. He wants to pursue an even more intense collaboration policy inspired by Nazi Germany so that France can fully integrate into the Third Reich. We are now in 1949, and at the same time as the Führer's 60th birthday, we're preparing to celebrate the official end of World War II. Propaganda reports that in the East, Russia is on its knees. Stalin and what remains of the Soviet government have taken refuge in the depths of Siberia. They say it's only a matter of months before the Red Army is completely crushed by the Wehrmacht. As he announced in his book Mein Kampf, Hitler launches the colonization of the conquered lands of the East, suitable for agriculture and therefore for feeding his people. Slowly but surely, the first Germans begin to settle on the former territory of the USSR. To attract settlers, the Nazi regime promises each family that goes to settle a few Slavic or Jewish slaves captured during the war. It's this same year that Hitler announces the Judenfrei project, which aims for a Europe without any Jews. A plan for massive deportation of Jews has been planned to the island of Madagascar. This former French colony is perfect since it's large enough to accommodate all the millions of Jews and far enough from Europe so we don't hear about them anymore. But not all Jews are deported. Many still remain in Europe and are used as slaves in the numerous monumental construction sites wanted by Hitler across Europe. They are exploited without shame, and those who have the misfortune of being too weak to work are executed. In the East, finally, Stalin was captured by the Nazis, thanks to the help of a certain Lavrenti Beria, the head of the Russian secret services, who allowed the Germans to get their hands on him. His motivations are simple. The Nazis promised him a good position in the Gestapo, but Hitler won't have time to judge his old enemy because Stalin manages to commit suicide in prison even before his trial begins. In India, the Allies have managed to galvanize their forces with Charles de Gaulle and Churchill at their head, and are preparing to lead their last fight against the German army, which, for its part, after the conquest of Africa, has marched toward them. Despite long negotiations, China did not agree to help the Allied forces. It must be said that the lucrative industrial contracts signed with the Third Reich, which will allow China to become the factory of the world, are more interesting to them than a war lost in advance. On April 20th, 1959, Hitler celebrates his 70th birthday in a world where his enemies can be counted on the fingers of one hand. Exceptionally, he left his ultra-protected residence of the Berghof in the Alps for a grand ceremony organized in the Great Dome of Germania and broadcast live on all televisions in the world. Germania is simply the new capital of the Reich, which was partly built on the ashes of Berlin. The plans for this new capital, designed to be the most imposing city in the world, are signed by the Führer himself. The main monument of the city, the Great Dome in which Hitler's birthday is being celebrated, is nearly 290 meters high as the initial plans provided, and was designed to contain no less than 150,000 people. It's almost as tall as the Eiffel Tower. The Führer seems quite happy with the ceremony, but he is very diminished. It's no longer a secret for anyone. Even Goebbels, the Reich's propaganda minister, struggles to hide the truth. Yes, the Führer is seriously ill. During the war, whether in this parallel reality or in ours, he had contracted Parkinson's disease. In addition to all the drugs he took and to which he had become completely addicted, such as methamphetamine and the hundreds of medications prescribed by his doctor, who was also a charlatan, hadn't helped his condition. We are now in 1962. Hitler is 73 years old. For 3 years, he hasn't made any public appearance. We barely hear him anymore, except a few times a year on the radio. One question already occupies everyone's minds: who will succeed the Führer? If Hermann Göring had been officially designated to become his successor, he ended up being unofficially sidelined. At the same time, not surprisingly, he spends his time organizing parties and decorating his houses with stolen works of art. For some time now, it's Reinhard Heydrich, leader of the SS since 1933, who appears as the next Führer. But young Helmut Goebbels, eldest son of the propaganda minister, increasingly overshadows him. The Führer then dies in 1962, a few days before the first German sets foot on the moon. But propaganda will claim that the Führer patiently waited for the official news of this feat before taking his last breath. The ceremony of his funeral is unprecedented and takes place near Munich, the Führer's favorite city. For 2 nights in an almost religious atmosphere, the whole world witnesses the funeral, and thus ends the life of Adolf Hitler in this parallel reality. He dies a true hero, adored by his people, in a completely subjugated Europe. But the story doesn't end there. Let's now see what happens after his death. Reinhard Heydrich takes power in 1962 and becomes the second Führer of the Reich. Contrary to what many hoped, his death did not weaken the Nazi regime. On the contrary, Heydrich, nicknamed the Butcher of Prague, is even more ruthless than his predecessor. Under his leadership, the Reich modernizes and strengthens its control over Europe. In the 1970s, the last pockets of resistance in India are finally crushed. Churchill dies in exile in 1975, and Charles de Gaulle follows in 1980. With the disappearance of these historical figures, hope for liberation gradually fades. In 1985, the Third Reich celebrates its 40 years of world domination. Propaganda is omnipresent, and the new generations born after the war only know the Nazi regime. Education is entirely controlled by the state and teaches the superiority of the Aryan race. History books have been rewritten and present Hitler as the savior of humanity. Technology has progressed greatly under the Reich. Nazi Germany established a permanent base on the moon in the 1970s and began exploring Mars in the 1990s. But these technological advances primarily serve military and surveillance objectives. Every citizen is registered, constantly monitored by a system of cameras and informants. In 1995, Heydrich dies in turn, and it's Helmut Goebbels who becomes the third Führer. He continues the policy of his predecessors, but with a more modern approach. He understands the importance of the internet, which has just appeared, and uses it as a tool for propaganda and mass control. In the early 2000s, Africa is completely colonized and exploited for its resources. Local populations live in conditions similar to slavery. South America, which had managed to remain relatively independent, finally falls under the economic and political influence of the Reich. In 2010, France celebrates its 65 years of occupation. Paris, renamed Germanic Lutetia, is unrecognizable. The Eiffel Tower has been destroyed and replaced by a monument to the glory of the Reich. The French language is disappearing, gradually replaced by German in all official spheres. The United States, although having retained some autonomy, has become a vassal state of the Reich. Their economy is entirely dependent on Germany, and their foreign policy is dictated by Germania. Hollywood mainly produces Nazi propaganda disguised as entertainment. In 2020, the whole world faces a pandemic similar to COVID-19. But in this reality, the Nazi regime uses the health crisis to further strengthen its control over populations. A social credit system, inspired by the one implemented in China in our reality, is imposed worldwide. Citizens who don't perfectly respect the Reich's rules lose points and are denied access to essential services. We are now in 2025. Helmut Goebbels, now 94 years old, is still in power but weakened. His son, Joseph Goebbels II, is preparing to take over. The Reich celebrates this year its 80 years of world domination. Surveillance technology has reached terrifying levels. Artificial intelligence, developed by Reich scientists, monitors every conversation, every movement, almost every thought. Mandatory brain implants for all citizens allow the detection of any dissident thought even before it turns into action. Cultural diversity has almost entirely disappeared. Languages, traditions, and non-Germanic religions have been systematically erased. Art, music, and literature are entirely controlled and must glorify the Reich and its values. The environment is in a catastrophic state. The Reich, obsessed with industrial production and territorial expansion, has never taken into account ecological issues. Climate change is much more advanced than in our reality, but propaganda denies its existence or blames it on the subhumans of occupied territories. Madagascar, which became the world's Jewish prison, is a forgotten territory where a few million descendants of the deported still survive, living in appalling conditions, completely cut off from the rest of the world. The resistance still exists, but it's tiny, fragmented, and operates in the most total clandestinity. Resistance networks communicate by archaic means to escape digital surveillance. They secretly preserve forbidden books, hidden works of art, forgotten languages, hoping that one day, perhaps, the Reich will collapse. But for now, on this October 23, 2025, the Third Reich seems more powerful than ever. It controls practically the entire planet, monitors every individual, and has erased almost all traces of the freedoms and diversity that characterized our world. And you watching this video in 2025 in our reality, imagine for a moment, what would you be doing if this version of the world were yours? Would you be a collaborator, a resistant, or simply someone trying to survive day to day, under the yoke of an absolute totalitarian regime? It's terrifying, isn't it? And that's why it's so important to remember real history, to never forget the horrors that were committed, and to remain vigilant against any form of totalitarianism. There you have it. I hope this dystopian video made you think. Don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Tell me in the comments what you think of this scenario and what other aspects of this alternate reality you'd like me to explore. Thanks for watching, and never forget, our freedom is never guaranteed. It must be defended every day.